can we start off with you perhaps just stating your name and position?
Okay, my name is Kelly King. I'm the chair of the Maui County Council.
Awesome, thanks.
Do you want me to look at you?
Yeah,
okay.
you can look at me. Would you like to respond to maybe both of his presentations, or would you want to just keep it specific to this last one?
I think it's both. I think this presentation sort of recapped the first presentation, then went into was sort of a inclusion of a how-to. You know, what are the next steps? And so I think they were both very informative. I had all my notes from the first one, so I was a little impatient, you know, waiting to get to the next steps, because I'd like to, you know, just because of my background in business and the things I've done in the community, the projects I've done, sometimes I just, you know, I'm real anxious to get things translated into action so there we can actually make a difference, you know, make the change. I thought it was interesting that he talked about transformation, but he said he was he preferred stability over change, and I think change is probably the only thing that's certain in this world. So everything changes, but I think what he was talking about, and he did use the word chaos, that we're not looking for chaos, we're not looking for friction or angst. What we're looking for is how to move forward given what we know about the past, and that we need to be informed about the past because it really sets up what the legalities are in the present. I learned a lot of information, and it's easier to assimilate when someone's speaking with civility, with complete regard for rule of law and for where people are today, not trying to gain something personally and not trying to be accusatory or inflammatory. And I found his presentation to be very civil and very caring. And from my point of view, it seemed extremely accurate with looking at the documents that he presented and the people that he showed in his slide presentations and his video presentations who backed up his information. It would be great to get those people to come to Maui County, because unfortunately there were only 5 of the 9 council members present at this meeting. And so what happens is sometimes you get 5 people who assimilate information, and then trying to transfer that information or the importance of it onto the people who weren't there is not that easy. I really wish that he would do this presentation for the broader community, because as with everything that the Maui County Council does, we do need people from the community to come out and testify and back up why we're doing what we're doing and the importance of it to the residents here and the people that we represent. So I think my biggest point of assimilation with this presentation is that it has to do with my own background. And my parents were severely wronged in their upbringing. They were both put in internment camps, the Japanese American internment camps during World War II. And so I grew up with this knowledge that my parents had done nothing wrong. They were put in basically prison camps for looking Japanese, for being Asian. And one of the things that they had always told me and my siblings about that experience is that it didn't happen to us. And so they admonished us not to carry it with us, not to keep it as a chip on our shoulder, but to use that experience to influence, you know, who we are. And so I didn't grow up thinking I had to get something back because of the stuff that my parents lost and my grandparents lost, because they lost property, they lost material things. They were put in holding camps at Santa Anita horse racing facility. So, you know, for 6 months they lived in a stable. And there are 8 kids in my dad's family. That's where they held them until they shipped them off to the internment camps. But I've always grown up with an appreciation of that message that my parents gave me, that this didn't happen to you. Don't carry it around with you, but, you know, understand that this was wrong. So I've always been sort of a champion for the underdog, and that's why I try to help those, you know, the disadvantaged and people who can't help themselves. And I've been really involved in the nonprofit world, and so I took that from this message that this is not asking for retribution or trying to blame somebody, but this is just understanding what happened before. And there are people in the past to blame that caused these actions, but where we are today is just how do we deal with this situation now that we know, and if we can accept the fact that there still is a kingdom of Hawaii and that it was never annexed, that there was occupation and there still is occupation, then how do we deal with that? And I was really impressed that he followed through with what he told us in the May 15th meeting with the Council of Regents, or Regency, and created the reconciliation or recognition of our current government. It's not a recognition of the state of Hawaii. It's a recognition of our form of government, that we can move forward with the lawmaking we're doing at the state and county levels. And so that makes it a little less confusing for those of us in positions of policy making and administration. But this needs to be a broader message than just Maui County Council and the people who were in the chambers. It needs to be really taken to all the counties, but also all the communities on every county, so that people understand what we're looking for, that we're looking for reconciliation, not retaliation, and that we can move forward as a community recognizing everybody's rights. I really like the fact that Dr. Sai focused on the fact that it's not a racial issue. It's that the state of Hawaii, or the kingdom of Hawaii, is made up of residents of Hawaii. It doesn't specifically call you out for having Native Hawaiian blood or not having Native Hawaiian blood. I think you're probably in a stronger position if you were born here, because that speaks to immediate citizenry. But I try to look at everybody who's a resident here as important, and not just because they vote for us, but because everything we do affects their lives. And both my kids were born and raised here, and I've always thought of them as being part of the Hawaiian community, even though they're half Caucasian, half Japanese. But I like the fact that the message was inclusive and was focused on the law and was focused on bringing people together around this issue, not separating people and not threatening the way of life for businesses that are already established and people who have property, going back into the explanation of what a royal patent is, and that it was legal to separate properties out of that and convey them to other people, and that's what's happened. So if you're registered with the Board of Conveyances, then you are the legal owner of that property. And I think that's a real confusing point of contention in our community, and not just Maui, but the state of Hawaii. So what is the difference between a royal patent and a deed to a piece of property? And basically what we heard today, it's if it's been registered as a conveyance.
Yeah, that seemed like probably cleared up a lot of things for people when they come in testifying about certain things.
Right. Ownership, that you have no property, you have no right to do something on this property because it's mine. And if you go back to the royal patent, but they may have missed the conveyances that were recorded between when the royal patent was given out and today.
Yes, yeah. So, that seems to be a really important thing, like you're saying, that this is, everybody's, Keanu and you guys seem to be working together to make it a smooth transition within your limitations in the county here, but it's a message that needs to be taken to the broader community, because there is a lot of kind of chaos and confusion in this sovereignty movement of people, having been sort of made to think about it in an ethnic way, or we're gonna get these guys back, or whatever it is, right? And we have to look at it realistically, like smooth transition.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happened in the past couple of decades is that there have been a lot of different definitions and interpretations of sovereignty and what that means for people. That's why I think there were something like 27 different sovereignty movements at one point. And it's because there was every extreme, and then the folks in the middle. And I remember talking to people who told me, well, when we get sovereignty back, which today we learned really never left. The sovereign kingdom is here. It's how it's governed that's that question. But that nothing will change. And then I've had people tell me, 20 years ago, oh yeah, nobody will be allowed to own property, and everybody will have to leave who doesn't own property. So I think that's been one of the confusing things about sovereignty is, what does that mean? Why are there so many definitions, and why are there groups fighting against each other to get what they perceive as the true sovereign nation back, or the sovereign kingdom? So this to me, the presentation today made a lot of sense. It was backed up by what appeared to be, and I'm not a legal expert, but to me they look like legal documents, and they were very convincing to I think to most of us council members. It's unfortunate today that we live in a world where people can look at a document, maybe even know that it came from a court record, maybe even know the person who researched and wrote it, and will tell you to your face, this is not true. That doesn't mean what it says it means. And this whole genre of fake news that's been created by our president and by the people who want to support him, right or wrong, has really damaged the whole rule of law and society in general. So we have to come together. I think we have to, first of all, get this information out, but we also have to have these discussions in our community where we can come together because we care about each other, because we want to learn the truth, because we want to move forward together as a community and do what's best for our next generation. And to me, that's the next step, is starting to get this message into the community. I believe there probably will be some proposals coming out of the session today for how to possibly incorporate his what he called an interpretation or a purpose clause into the bills that we write. And basically what Dr. Tsai was asking for is something that's in resolutions. So in a resolution you have all the whereases, and then you have the now therefore, and that's the purpose. The whereas explains the situation, and then the now therefore, be it resolved, that explains what the purpose of the resolution is. But when you have a bill, you don't have it, you have it in a different format. You have a bill for an act. And so putting that clause in there, which relates it to the legality that exists today, I think will be a legal issue, and it'll be a discussion that I don't know what committee it will go to yet. It seems to me probably the one that handles legal issues, but it also is a cultural preservation issue, which may come under that committee. It could be a budgetary issue if it involves a lot of legal counsel, if we have to bring legal counsel in. But I think it's important to discuss it at length and bring community members in and see if it's a small thing. It's a big thing, I think, to our legal counsel, but it also is a very confusing thing to the general public. Like, what does that really mean? What are you doing when you put that into, what statement are you making? Is the council then acquiescing to, whatever we're doing is not legal or is not valid, which I don't think is what Dr. Tsai was telling us. But these are the things that will come out, the misconceptions based on what people heard from someone who heard about today versus being there in person, and maybe didn't watch your video and maybe didn't read the documents. So it has to be very clear today, because it's amazing to me how many people will get on Facebook and take whatever they see there as the gospel truth. And you ask somebody, where'd you get your information? Facebook. So I'm hoping that people are actually seeking out the actual information and the documents that back it up, maybe looking at the actual questions as they were asked on the floor, so those don't get misconstrued. And I think there was a lot of sincerity today. So those of us who are trying to get clarity, and those of us who want to figure out how to take this information and move forward with it and make it meaningful, so that we can reach that comfort level that that we are operating in a legal venue, in a legal arena, and it is meaningful when we pass something. When we yesterday we had a pretty lengthy hearing with a couple of hours of testimony and mostly local people and people who were with the canoe clubs up in Hanaka'o'o Beach, which is called Canoe Beach, trying to get a ban on that beach from commercialization, so that they don't have to compete with the tourist operations there that are taking scuba divers out and renting out surfboards and paddleboards and things like that. And so these are people who are local residents and just want the beach to be for themselves. We're talking about 100 yards of beach. So we listened to 2 hours of testimony, and we voted, to give them the beach. We voted to ban the recreational activities. And those are the things that, that's the really good thing that we do too. We don't want those things to be negated, and I know those people don't want them to be invalid. So the action that Dr. Tsai took by being the head of this Council of Regents, is it Council of Regency?
Council of Regency.
Council of Regency, to validate the current operations that we're doing, the current policy making that we do at the state and county level, I think is really important, so that the things that people, everything's a double-edged sword. So if you fight against all the laws that we've made, then all the good laws that you may want to have been enacted, those get wiped out too. So it's a confusing issue for people who don't know what's going on and haven't heard the information. It was a lot of information, and it was a lot of legalese. So even sitting there, it could be confusing to people who are even watching it if you don't have the interpretation. I think Dr. Tsai did a really good job of interpreting all that legalese and the documents he was showing us, and here's what it really means.
Wow. Yeah, it was, a lot of it was hard for me. I would notice my intention starting to go, and then I have to bring myself back. Okay. And yeah, it's a lot of legal stuff. So it'll be interesting to watch the video over again and try to let it sink in and all that. And I don't envy your corporation counsel, being that he's, coming from the American legal perspective, and now he has to try to fit this stuff in. It's going to be interesting to see it, maybe how he wrangles.
And maybe that speaks to the need for to have some deputies on board who have expertise in international law, because international law is not difficult for somebody who understands international law. It's just that we don't have experts on international law in our Corp Council. And if we accept the truths that we heard today, that's the next step. That's one of the next steps, is to get somebody on board who is an expert in international law and can give us some of that guidance that you heard today that the Corp Council is reluctant to give.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. Do you imagine that any future activity on this, will it stay in that same committee, or do you think it'll go expanded into the county council at large?
I think it'll expand into other committees, because that committee, you heard that it started with a concern over zoning changes and land use designations. And then it was interesting that the example of the bill that was used was actually the styrofoam ban, which came out of the environmental committee. But if we put it into like the governance, we have one that's called governance. Let me see, what is that? GET, Governance, Ethics, and Transparency Committee. That might be the best venue to have that discussion, because really these issues cut across all the other issues that we're dealing with, and we need to know how, if we're going to put something in our code, like the purpose clause into all the ordinances, how does that affect every committee's work? And what commitment are we willing to make to step up our game as far as doing things like bringing somebody in who understands international law, having the documents maybe even on our website for the general public to access, and having these discussions out in the community as well.
Absolutely. That's a great idea. I don't know if you've gone this far in your thinking, but are there benefits that you imagine to like deoccupation in the future? Hawaii being under, having its sovereignty back in a sense, it's like.
Well, I got to tell you, I was all for sovereignty and splitting off from the United States after the last election. So that was my first thought was, the sovereignty was sounding pretty good after the Trump election, but you don't have to use that. I mean, there are always probably the biggest benefit is just that recognition and reconciliation, because there are a lot of people who are upset about it, and I don't think we'll ever there's no issue on this island or probably in the world where you're going to get 100% agreement on all sides of the issue. But I think there would be a healing factor to that recognition, and also for people to understand things like what land ownership and the legal process, the fact that now that we're making decisions that have been recognized that everything is legal, and so we get more people working with us as a council and with our state legislature and with our administration than fighting back against it as being invalid. That's going to help not only those of us in policy making, but I think it helps the general public too, because it's not a healthy thing to live in angst and to live a life where you think you've been wronged and that your mission in life is to right those wrongs. And some people don't do that in a civil and reasonable manner. So, I've gotten, I think every council member has probably had some threats, and I've got, anonymous phone calls after some of these presentations happen. And they're not, they're directed at the council in general or the things that the council's doing, but it's not a healthy way to live for that person either, to carry that anger around with you because you don't understand where we're at legally or where we are at as a community. You don't understand that the things that happened in the past didn't happen to you. They happened to your ancestors. And a lot of, there's probably very few people in this world who haven't had some ancestor who was wronged for no good reason, who had something taken away from them. We can't live our lives, trying to fight to get something back that never belonged to us in the first place. But the place in that the Hawaiian Kingdom would have in this state, that's something that we can get back for people.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating too, like looking at history. The Hawaiian Kingdom was a very progressive nation, arguably the most progressive nation in the world actually at that time. When you start really looking at like the policies that they had compared to the United States was based on white supremacy. You still had slavery.
Right.
Chinese and Japanese were second-class citizens, and you know what I mean? And
that's right.
In the U.S. and Europe, education was designated for the rich. So the poor weren't educated, so you didn't have as high a literacy. Whereas in the Hawaiian Kingdom, the monarchs made it a priority that education was for all people, which is why they had the highest literacy rate in the world at that time. So they had these very progressive things. Women were leading political movements. They were like judges and attorneys, and they were, like giving speeches and things that at the time you couldn't even talk in public when you're a woman, right?
Right.
In Europe, the United States, hardly at all.
I mean, we just had Japan just got a brand new emperor, and the emperor's wife was not even allowed to be in the room during part of the ceremony because that was traditional. So as far as, Japan has come and having a lot of women businessmen or businesswomen, they still are hanging on to some of those old traditions. So yeah, I think Hawaii should be the most progressive. I think especially now that we're such a melting pot of all these different religions and races and ethnic groups and age groups too. We've probably done the best job of taking care of our elderly. We have so many kupuna programs on this island, specifically on Maui. And so I think there are a lot of things that the rest of the country can learn from us too. This will be a big one. I mean, if we can come together as a community and make this recognition, that's what's really missing in the world too, is coming together around an issue or a topic or something that's so right in front of us. It appears to be right in front of us, and we can't accept it as the truth and come together. So if this turns into a movement where the different councils can come together around it, and then hopefully the state, and not see it as a threat. And I think that's where it starts to get political, is when people in positions of power see this as a threat to their power. I've always loved the quote that good leaders gain power by giving it away. And really, you need to be a good leader, you need to know how to delegate authority and power and get people involved, and then you're all supporting each other. And that's one of the things I've always thought was wrong with our, it's ironic too, because I think that's one of the things that's wrong with our political system, is people hanging on to that power tooth and nail. And yet when you look at the monarchy, I guess that's what it was all about. It was like one person in power, so hopefully a benevolent dictator, that tells everybody else what they're going to be doing. And it seemed to work, like you said, the fact that there was that recognition that education is important, so the mandates went out. We don't have that in our world anymore. We're losing, our antidote to that, to having a malevolent dictator, was to create democracy, and now our democracy is at risk. So who's to say what the better form of government is?
True, yeah. And the constitutional monarchy, the legislature, was very important at that time. The Constitution of 1864, Lot Kapuiva Kamehameha V, put a clause in there that said that the monarch could not, on his own, create a new constitution. It had to be validated by the legislature. So once he did that in the Constitution of 1864, it really reduced the power of the monarchy to be an absolute at that point. And so people were very engaged in the government process.
Yeah, because you can make a difference. And it's sort of what I see it happening with our council, the way it is. And it started, I think, at the beginning of my first term 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago. It felt like more people were getting involved. We had a record number, like 80 people come and testify on the very first day 2.5 years ago. And we finally got done with that first meeting at 3:30 in the morning. But people were very engaged, and I heard over and over again people saying, I've never testified at the council, but this is so important. And so now we have, I run into people all the time who are watching it on a Kaku. You can get on your phone, and you can, there's an app there, and you can sit on the bus and watch the county council meetings. And I'm actually shocked at how many people tell me that they're hooked on it. It's like a soap opera to them, because they have the characters, they all know us, and they kind of like the way that some of us are speaking and asking questions. But that I've never, I've been involved with the county council as a constituent for many years, because I've always been an environmentalist, and the company that my husband and I started was focused on turning used cooking oil into fuel. And so there were a lot of, permit issues and things I had to come to the council for. It was always a really scary thing, and it always felt to me that there were not even half the council members really listening when you watched people testify. And now when I see people testifying and everybody's paying attention, and I've held some public hearings with this last budget session in the evening, and had just like, in the 50s or 60s, 70 people come out to testify. And I've gotten really good feedback from people emailing me or just telling me on the street that, they really appreciated the fact that everybody seemed to be listening, that, we really are making an attempt to make people feel more relaxed when they come and testify, and just understand you're talking to your friends. It's not, the attitude about, getting back to this attitude about power, that if you look at a position on the state legislature or the county council or the governor or the mayor as a service to community, and you understand it's not who you are, it's what you're doing. And 4 years later, you'll be doing something else. And so you don't get your identity wrapped up in the position of power. You try to accomplish what you set out to accomplish, and then you move on to something else. And that, I think, is what's missing. So if we can come together around that idea that what we're looking for is a way to serve the community better, not a way to put a person or sets of people in power, then I think we'll be doing something that's truly just groundbreaking.
I love that. It reminds me of something that when I interviewed Umi Perkins, who's a PhD, he's a teacher at Kamehameha Schools, and he's a friend of Keanu, and he's hip to all this information. I made a documentary about the rule of law and how it applies to this situation. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's really Keanu's trying to get people to comply with the law, and that's all his whole mission is about: compliance with the law, smooth transition, right? And I asked Umi about the rule of law. What is the value of the rule of law? And he said the rule of law is ideally supposed to empower people to be able to speak truth to power and to keep the power politics in check, and to try to create an even level playing field. That's the ideal of it.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the original intent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And a lot, some of the, I remember when I served on the State Board of Education back in the late 90s, and I got myself there. I was a young mother, but I was involved in building playgrounds on the, just kind of spearheading playground projects. And we myself and a couple of my young mother girlfriends spearheaded Kalama Park Playground, which was the first super playground on the island, just because we wanted a place for our kids to play. And we're like, let's make a really big playground. But then I got pressured by people, because I was in the PTA and just my kids were in public school, to run for the Board of Education. And I did get myself on the Board of Education. I think before that, our Board of Education member had been on it since it was created, since they created a State Board of Education. He'd been the only one we ever had. Nobody ever beat him. And so I was able to win that position. But I remember going through, there's only one member on Maui, there's one on the Big Island, there's one on Kauai. And I remember talking to the Big Island member at one point, who was a professor with a PhD, and he really loved being on the State Board of Education. And he said to me, I can see you being in this position for like 3 terms. And the terms were 4 years. I'm like, no way, I'm not, this is a service position, it's volunteer. And he said, but don't you just love, having that title, State Board of Education? And I said, no, it's not a title to me. It's not about that. It was funny the first time I saw an envelope that said the Honorable, Board of Education member, and had my name. But I think that's one of the problems, is elevating people. I mean, it's one thing to have respect, and we have respect across the board for everybody, whether you're a clerk at a store or you're the governor. Respect is really important, but it shouldn't come just because you have a title. And I think that's the problem we have, is we elevate people with titles and give them special privileges and give them, different kinds of respect and accolades and perks. And we're forgetting that they're there to do a job. They're not there to be a title, to fill a title. So I was asked to do a presentation at the Kuleana Academy. Do you know what that is? At the Hawaii, I think it's called Hawaii Alliance for Progressive Action, HAPA, puts on this Kuleana Academy, and they train people in politics.
Like Gary Hoozer's.
Yeah, Gary Hoozer's thing. They train people to either be candidates or help with campaigns, or even just do lobbying. And so he had asked me in my first term to come and speak to the class, the cohort. And the first thing I said was, let's go around the room and everybody say 3 words that describe yourself. Who are you? And so we went around the room, and after everybody finished, I said, okay, if that's who you are, that's who you need to be when you run for office. That's who you need to be if you don't win, or if you do win. And that's who you need to be when you're done in that office. And so think of yourself using those 3 words, not with the title that you may gain. And you're going to be much more focused on the job that way. You're going to be somebody that I would want to elect. And then you move on and you pass the torch. And we don't have that. We have people that are making career. And I don't think it's an unnoble thing to make a career out of politics, as long as you keep in the forefront why you're there and what you want to accomplish while you're there. And that title, you don't let that title define you.
I agree. I listened to some of Tulsi Gabbard's interviews, and she's always coming back to the idea of service.
Mm-hmm.
that it's not about her being president or, you know, that she wants to be known as that. It's more that she, you know, she earned service from the military, and service is her thing, and that's, and it's, yeah, it's like you're saying, that's really important for us to remember that.
Yeah.
That's what we're all, whether you're a grocery clerk or a
Yeah.
government official,
Yeah.
and that everyone deserves the respect for the job that they're doing.
That's right.
We should all be also paid well enough to live comfortably if we're working a regular, you know, people that are working jobs where they're barely making enough to survive, but we still need them to do that job.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think there's a misconception about what it takes to live, you know, reasonably okay. People are not looking to get rich or have a lot of disposable income. They're just looking to be able to rent a place or buy a place and put food on their table and be home for their kids some of the time.
And if there's an emergency, be able to pay out $1,000 for an emergency,
Right.
or something without it
Right.
destroying everything.
Right, and I think part of this movement, the movement to reconcile the Kingdom of Hawaii, has to do with people feeling like, and it's not just the Hawaiian people of Hawaiian descent or ancestry, but it's the people who who are living in a place where they're basically forgotten. You know, the people who are at the lower end of the income scale and feel like they've been forgotten by the leaders in the community. So this is another, I think that's one of the other benefits, is coming to a recognition. It's not about somebody wanting to be king and saying, yeah, now we're all going to bow down to you. It's about this idea of a place where we all care about everybody of every stature in the community. That's what it means to me, is that, you know, that there would be a focus on that. Because like you said, that is what the rule of law is supposed to affect. It's supposed to bring equity among us. Well, we don't have that right now.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was perfect. Anything else?
I think we covered pretty much everything.